This lesson, you'll learn how to reduce certain noun clauses to infinitive phrases. An infinitive is the simple form of a verb, usually preceded by to. For example, to reduce. Can you tell me how to reduce noun clauses? Actually, this is an example of a reduced noun clause. The full clause would be how I can reduce noun clauses. Notice the question word how and the modal verb can. This represents our first group of noun clauses which can be reduced to infinitive phrases. These are noun clauses that begin with a question word and include the modal verb can, could, or should. Let's look at some examples. Will you tell me where I can get some ice cream? This is the full noun clause. To reduce it to an infinitive phrase, we simply remove I and can and add to make where to get. Will you tell me where to get some ice cream? Here's another example. My doctor told me why I should not eat ice cream. Why I should not eat ice cream is the full noun clause. It can be reduced to, my doctor told me why not to eat ice cream. We can do this same thing with noun clauses that have whether. For example, I'm not sure whether I should listen to my doctor or not. That ice cream looks pretty good. To reduce this, we'll say, I'm not sure whether to listen to my doctor or not. Ice cream is just too delicious. Careful. The subject in the main verb and the noun clause must be the same in order to reduce it to an infinitive phrase in the way that I just showed you. For example, Lisa wants to know how her child can improve his English skills. In this sentence, Lisa is the subject in the main clause, and her child is the subject in the noun clause, which means we cannot reduce it without changing the meaning. So we cannot say Lisa wants to know how to improve his English skills. It's confusing. Are we talking about Lisa or about her child? Okay, that concludes part 1 of reducing noun clauses to infinitive phrases. Watch part 2 to learn about 2 other types of noun clauses that can be reduced in the same way. Reducing noun clauses to infinitive phrases, part 2. In part 2 of this lesson, we're going to talk about the second category of noun clauses that can be reduced to infinitive phrases. This involves making commands, requests, or asking for permission, and specifically using the verbs tell, say, and ask. Let's start with giving commands. Emily and Jake walked into work one day. They're teachers. However, it was a hot day and the semester was nearly over, so the two of them were dressed in rather casual clothing. When their boss saw them, he was not pleased with how they were dressed. He told them, "Please dress professionally." You know that we can say, "He told us that we should dress professionally," or "He said that we should dress professionally. These are the full noun clauses, but they can be reduced to he told us to dress professionally and he said to dress professionally. Notice that tell requires an indirect object pronoun. However, say does not need a pronoun. In fact, a statement like this is wrong. We can also reduce noun clauses to infinitive phrases when requesting that someone do something. Like this is wrong. We can also reduce noun clauses to infinitive phrases when requesting that someone do something. For example, this child asks his mother, "Will you ride the carousel with me?" The full noun clause would be, the child asked his mother if she would ride the carousel. When we reduce it, it simply becomes an infinitive phrase. The child asked his mother to ride the carousel. Remember, this is an example of someone requesting that someone else do something, which means that the subject in the main clause is different from the subject in the noun clause. The subject in the main clause in this example is child, and the subject in the noun clause is his mother. That means that we need to include his mother in both the full noun clause and the reduced noun clause, because we don't want to confuse it with asking for permission. Let's look at an example to understand. The child asks his mother, "May I ride it again?" To make a noun clause, we can say, the child asked if he could ride the carousel again. And to reduce this noun clause, we'll simply say, the child asked to ride the carousel again. In this example, the subject is the same in the main clause and in the noun clause. Notice that in the full noun clause, we need to include the pronoun he. However, because this example shows someone asking for permission, in the reduced noun clause, there is no pronoun. This is an important distinction to make between requesting that someone else do something and asking for permission. Okay, that concludes part 2. Watch part 3 to learn about the third and final type of noun clause that can be reduced to an infinitive phrase. See you next time. Reducing noun clauses to infinitive phrases, part 3. Agree, decide, promise, pretend, hope, expect, remind, and require are all examples of verbs that can be followed by noun clauses. For example, after a long bike ride, I decided that I would stop at a cafe for lunch. Also, some of the noun clauses that follow these verbs may be reduced to infinitive phrases. As you see here in this example, we reduced that I would stop at a cafe for lunch to stop at a cafe for lunch. Agree, decide, promise, pretend, and hope all require that the subject be the same in both the main clause and the noun clause in order to reduce the noun clause to an infinitive phrase. However, when reducing noun clauses that follow expect, remind, or require, it is not necessary that the subject be the same in both clauses. Let's take a look at some examples. We'll start with promise. I promised my sister that I would watch her dog. What's the subject in this first clause? It's I. And what about the second clause? It's also I. These two clauses have the same subject. That means we can reduce the noun clause to an infinitive phrase. I promised to watch my sister's dog. However, the same is not true with this sentence. I promised that her dog would get a daily bath. Now, I is the subject in the first clause, and her dog is the subject in the noun clause, which means we can't reduce this noun clause. Let's see how a verb like expect is a little bit different. We expect that we will have a good time at the baseball game. We is the subject in the first clause and the subject in the noun clause, which means we have the same subject in both clauses. Let's reduce this noun clause to an infinitive phrase. What should it be? Good. We expect to have a good time at the baseball game. Let's look at another sentence. We expect that our team will destroy the other team. Is the subject the same in both clauses? No, it's not. We is the subject in the main clause, and our team is the subject in the dependent clause. However, with a verb like expect, it's okay to reduce the noun clause to an infinitive phrase, even though there are different subjects. We can say, we expect our team to destroy the other team. We have reduced this noun clause to an infinitive phrase. However, notice that when we do so, we do need a pronoun or noun in the reduced noun clause. Okay, that concludes the final part of reducing noun clauses to expect, remind, and require are all examples of verbs that can be followed by noun clauses. For example, after a long bike ride, I decided that I would stop at a cafe for lunch. Also, some of the noun clauses that follow these verbs may be reduced to infinitive phrases. As you see here in this example, we reduced that I would stop at a cafe for lunch to stop at a cafe for lunch. Agree, decide, promise, pretend, and hope all require that the subject be the same in both the main clause and the noun clause in order to reduce the noun clause to an infinitive phrase. However, when reducing noun clauses that follow expect, remind, or require, it is not necessary that the subject be the same in both clauses. Let's take a look at some examples. We'll start soon.